happy to be somewhere in person. I don't know if you guys relate to that at all. So first of all, just turn to somebody, not like you haven't already, and say, hi, it's so good to actually see you. It's funny, I think a lot of you are, go figure, teaching in schools, so you've already transitioned back to society a little bit. But I'm not teaching anymore. I'm at home with my kids. I homeschool them. So I don't get out ever. And I have like a lot of anxiety around this trip, just like I'm totally out of the groove of traveling and doing conference things, like things that were really second nature. So it's been an adventure, but I'm so glad to be here. And actually the last conference that I was at was ACTFL in 2019 when Chinmay, I won't say accosted me, but accosted me after the session. And she said, we want to make sure we get you on the calendar. And at the time I had so many things between now and then nothing happened, but here I am. So thank you for having me. I wanted to start out with just a little bit of a story about something that has been going on in my life these last few months. So when schools first shut down in 2020, I had two kids in school. I had a second grader and a kindergartner. And we very quickly learned that virtual school was just not going to work for our family because Vermont, as it turns out, is the least connected place on the planet, I think. And so I can barely have enough internet connection for me to be doing streaming. It comes in and out. And so the idea of having multiple people was like, no way. So then as we were looking at the next school year and things were going to be virtual again, and I was going to have 3 kids that were going to be attending school, I just said, there's no way that we can do that. So I'm like, all right, we're homeschooling. So we homeschooled last school year, and some things were good, but some things were, and mostly it was just like patchwork. Like we're just doing this to get through the year, and then next year we'll go back to normal life. But there were a lot of things we liked about it, and as things seemed to not really be going back to normal for this school year, we started thinking about what options we had. Do we want to send the kids back to public school when they're going to be, things are going to be changing all the time, and with 5 kids, like change is just not great. I like to know what's coming. So we were looking at a private school that had a little bit more flexibility. They didn't have to do all of the state orders and things, and it was smaller. So we applied there, and I really hit it off with the principal, and I have literally no friends in Vermont. So connecting with this principal was like really awesome, and I was like, I'm gonna have a friend. This school is gonna be great. And then I had to take my kids for an evaluation day so that they could just see, like, are they gonna fit into the classes? What holes might they have? And it was on my second oldest child, my son Leland. It was on his birthday, so we brought in birthday cupcakes to take to the teachers on evaluation day. And like we walk in the door and we give them the cupcakes, and Leland's teacher is like, okay, Lee, let's go, we're gonna go do this evaluation. And all the kids got whisked off in different directions, and I'm sitting in the library waiting, and all of a sudden Leland comes like storming back, and he's like, I hate this place, I'm never going here. And I'm like, what happened? He's like, I'm so stupid, this place is so stupid, I hate this school. And I'm like, what happened? And like the teacher didn't come in right away, so finally the principal walked in, and she's like, can I talk to you for a minute? And so I'm like, what happened? And apparently the teacher had given Leland like a paper of things to read that was too hard for him. And he just looked at it, and he's like, she's like, I just need you to read this. And he didn't say anything, he just stared at it. And then she said, I just need you to read something. And he's like, I hate this! This is stupid! And then stormed into the library to find me. So the teacher's like, okay, it's fine. Like, he's been homeschooling for a year. He like hasn't been in society, so I understand that there's like stresses about this. I'm like, yeah. So that's fine. So she's like, we'll just work with it. We'll figure out on another day where he's at. No problem. So another day comes and we go in for like visitation day. And so all the kids go in and they like sit in the classes, and Leland's like stressed out because he hates that place. And I'm like, dude, it's fine. They're not gonna ask you to do anything. Like, you're just gonna be sitting in the back of the class. I think you're gonna like play a game with your classmates. It's gonna be fine. And he's like, okay. So he goes in and I drop him off. A couple hours later, I come back. Leland comes out, smile on his face, and he's like, I love this school. I can't wait to go here. And I'm like, awesome. And so I see the principal, and I'm like, oh, so it sounds like a great day. And she's like, I'm gonna email you. And I was like, okay. So she emailed me, and apparently the teacher that in the class that Leland was visiting had asked him a math question. And I had told Leland that he wouldn't have to do anything that day. So he said, my mom says I don't have to do anything. And the teacher was like, well, no, just answer a math question. And he's like, this is stupid. So he goes, so this is my second son. So in this email, she said, so unfortunately, we just don't have the staff. It's a very small school. She said, we cannot offer enrollment to your son. She's like, the other kids are fine, they can come here. She's like, he's like, he can go to public school, and then, after a year of like reintegrating, then like he'll be great. I'm like, I'm not gonna send 4 of my kids to this school and then just tell my one child, like, no, sorry, you can't do it. So Leland, we didn't tell him that this is what happened. We're just like, we decided not to go to this school. So the summer, all sorts of things happened, but it ended up that we decided we were going to homeschool again. But I knew that I couldn't do what I was doing last year because I mostly just let it slide and focused on work. So I needed something to kind of keep me grounded, so we joined a co-op, and I was talking to the director of the co-op. It's like we go one day a week with our whole family, and I sit down on the classes, and different parents teach the different classes, and I said, okay, well, I do have one son who like has some behavior stuff, and this is what happened at the other school. And she's like, no. She's like, we're gonna work with whatever it is. We're gonna work with the kid. We believe there's no bad kids. We can handle it. So we went, and I get to sit in on one of the classes. I could teach one, but no. So I get to sit in on one of the classes. So I choose to sit in on Leland's class. And that first day, one of the things that they do every week, the kids do a presentation. And they can present on anything that they want. And we knew this going in. So Leland had decided he was going to present about our new puppy. So he took in a picture about the puppy, and it's his turn to present to his class of like 8 kids. And he stands up there, and he was so excited to present about it. And then he gets up there and he's like, and then he does his thing that he does when he gets really uncomfortable, where he flops down onto the ground, like laying on his stomach, and then he like does the worm back to his seat. And so the teacher was like, "Was that your puppy?" And he's like worming across the floor. So that didn't go great. So then the next week, he was going to present again, and he decided he was going to bring in his bow and arrow that he made. So he had like found a bendy stick, and he cut notches in it, and he tied, and it's like really amazing. And he made an arrow, and he tied feathers on the end, and he brings it in, and he gets up there for his presentation. And he stands up there, and he raises again, and one of the girls in the class goes, "Is that a bow and arrow?" And he just stands there, doesn't say anything. And then she said, "Did you make that?" And he's like, and she's like, "That is so cool." And then all the kids in the class were like, "What? You made that? Does it really work?" And he like walked over, and they're like in the sanctuary of this church that we meet in, and so we like shot it across the sanctuary, and they're like, "What? That's so cool!" And literally in that moment, everything changed for him. Like in that moment, his classmates gave him this gift of letting him know that he was capable and letting him know that he was accepted. And he needed to hear that so much. And they did that to him using language. It started out with just a simple question. And, we forget, I think, a lot of times as language teachers that we are teaching something that has so much power. And we can really get caught up in the minutia of like, how do you teach a language, and like what are the pieces, and the words and the structures and all of this. But what we are teaching has power. Language can build barriers, so not great power, and language can tear barriers down, and that's what that was for that day. And I don't think I'll ever leave this co-op now, because it was just the most amazing experience for us, and has been for Leland. But language connects us. Language connects us to each other. This is going to be a little bit tricky as I try to point. Language connects us to each other, so your language can connect your students to each other. It connects your students to you. It connects students to their passions, to their purposes, and to all of these different things in the world. What we are teaching as language teachers has power. But like, what even is language? I don't know, did any of you guys really study what language is in your language teacher training? A lot of you? Any of you? Yeah, so I realized recently that in my teacher training, I learned a lot about different ways that people have taught language over the history of, the universe. Learned different methodologies that have been used. But I didn't really ever learn about what language is or how language is acquired. So this is something I've really been digging into lately, because it's kind of funny to think that we're teaching something without actually understanding what the thing is that we're teaching. Language is a system of communication. So language is not communication. Language is a system that we use to communicate. Language is a system that we use to interpret, to express, to negotiate meaning for a purpose in a given context. But a system, okay, so I'm like, what system? System, what's a system? Okay, well, we have the power system, and the power system is like all of these big towers, and there's wires, and there's like a way that things move through it. And we have like closet organization systems. So in your closet, you have shelves and you have bars, and there's like a way that things go in there. And language has all of that too. Language has pieces, and it has connectors, and it has a purpose. It has linguistic items, morphemes and phonemes. It has syntax, grammar, which, well, no, I'll confess that dirty secret in my workshop tomorrow. I'll have a dirty secret about grammar. And context. So language has all of these three dimensions that are making it up. But what are, so if we have this thing that we're trying to teach, we must have some ideas about how it should be taught. How are we going to teach students about these items, this syntax, this context? How do they get that? How do they get all of those pieces, and how do they put them together? And I wanted to take a couple minutes, and think about what are our beliefs about language teaching. And this is something that is adapted from Eric Herman, and I learned it from my amazing director of training, Alicia Cardenas. And I'm going to show you a few different beliefs, and I want you to just think in your heads about the degree to which you agree or disagree with these statements. So you can, if you want to show people at your table, you can, but mostly just think in your head. If it's a 1, you strongly agree with it, 2, you agree, 3, disagree, and 4, strongly disagree. Okay, first belief. To what degree do you believe that communication is 2 or more people talking? To what degree do you believe that communication is 2 or more people talking? So we say that language is a system for communication. Is that what communication is? Do you agree or disagree? Okay, next one. Smart kids, or kids with good study skills, are good language learners. If you want to kind of discuss it at your table quietly. Okay? Strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree. You can't say, I agree, but, or disagree or disagree. Okay. Next one, explicit instruction helps students acquire language. So explicit instruction being teaching kids about the language helps them to acquire it. To what degree do you agree with that? And I don't want you to think about what you think is the right answer. I want you to think about what do you really believe about that. Okay, language learners need to get used to the feeling of discomfort and uncertainty and how to work through that. To what degree do you agree with that belief? Language learners need to get used to the feeling of discomfort and uncertainty and how to work through that.
As a teacher, I'm like, do I want to?
The more languages you learn, the easier it is to learn more languages. Could you support your belief with evidence? The best way to build linguistic competence is to learn the rules and memorize vocabulary and then practice using the words and rules. Strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree. A learner's first language interferes with acquiring a new language. When it comes to building linguistic competence, using the language is more effective than learning about the language. When it comes to building linguistic competence, using the language is more effective than learning about the language. I don't want any comments on that. Learners acquire language when they listen to or read messages that they understand. Communicative approaches are great, but at some point, kids need to learn grammar. Okay. So, I want you to just think for yourself. Thinking about what you really believe about those things, where did you get those beliefs?
Martina back.
Okay. Boo. Bad answer. Where did you get those beliefs?
The classroom.
So, when I was reflecting on this activity, I went back. We're reflecting on where we've been, and I tried to think about what my beliefs were when I started teaching language. And I realized that of those ones, what I would consider my core beliefs were that the best way to build linguistic competence was to learn the rules and memorize vocabulary, and then practice using the words and rules. And really, that was just my belief because that's all I knew was possible. Like, I was doing it, so I must have believed it, but that was what had been modeled for me in my language classes, and I didn't know that there was any other kind of a way. So that belief was just kind of passed on to me by my teachers, and my thoughts about what a language class was supposed to look like. Language learners need to get used to the feeling of discomfort and uncertainty and how to work through that. Again, as I consider myself to be a pretty resilient person, and I was successful at learning language, and I signed a blood pact with my college Spanish professor that when I went abroad, I wasn't going to speak any English, and I didn't, and it worked for me, and I got used to the discomfort, and I worked through it, and so I knew if my students would just toughen up and do that too, they would be fine. Okay, so again, that was just kind of based on my experience. It had worked for me, and so surely it would work for them. Smart kids are good, or kids with good study skills are good language learners. I thought, I mean, like in all of life, if you apply yourself, you're gonna do it. Like I applied myself to Spanish, it worked for me. But the funny thing about these core beliefs that I've learned since then is that I had a lot of things in my life, a lot of factors in my life that were influencing my success as a language learner, just as they were influencing my success in a lot of areas of life. I was born on a dairy farm in central New York, which is the traditional territory of the Onondaga Nation. And like every good farm girl, I was super good at being productive. Productivity was a really strong value in my family. And I mean, maybe this is a stereotype about Indiana, but I think you guys are like farm country, so you probably have a lot of good farm kids. Those of you that are in the boonies, anyway, that are focused on productivity. My parents are both college graduates, Ivy League college graduates. They went to Cornell in the animal science program, which is part of the public school. So it's like they have an Ivy League degree, but they're not real Cornellians. But they had been to college, so they had navigated the educational system. They had worked through all of that. They had experience. They knew what it was going to take for me to get into college. Neither of my parents came from wealthy families. My mom was the daughter of Dutch immigrants. And my grandfather really mismanaged his dairy farm, so they grew up very poor. So both of my parents had to work very hard to be able to pay their way through college. And we didn't have money growing up, although we had really good standing in the community. So I knew that I was going to have to work my way through college, and my parents really prepared me for that. Like my dad knew what debt means, and he knew that I didn't want it, and he had rules for us about how much debt we were allowed to take on when we went to college. My parents helped us with FAFSA applications, and well, they did them. I didn't do them. My mom did them. I'm sorry, I think it's like FAFSA season right now, right? Are any of you guys going through that as parents? So I had all of these supports. And then I was also, my family instilled these beliefs in me, and these were the beliefs that school systems are really built on, this idea that if you work hard, you will succeed. And frankly, like when I started teaching, I didn't really have a problem with that. I was like, I want my good kids to get good grades. And if you're not going to give me the time of day and you're not going to pay attention to my class, then what do I care if you fail? Like you're doing this to yourself. But I didn't realize, I didn't learn, unfortunately, until later in my life that there's so many other factors, that not everybody has the same life that I grew up with and the same level of support and guidance and what we can call tailwinds propelling them forward. There's a lot of kids that have a lot of headwinds coming at them. And I really was confronted with that in a big way when I started teaching in Alaska. Believe it or not, the middle school that I taught at in Alaska is statistically, or it was, anyway, the most racially diverse middle school in the United States, which, I don't know, seems surprising, even to me being there, but we had a very diverse student population. We had a lot of immigrant kids that were like new to country. We had a lot of kids whose families didn't speak English at home. We had a lot of families that had come, a lot of Alaska Native families whose families had come down from the villages, and there's a lot of trauma that comes with that. And I realized that when I was teaching, when I was trying to build linguistic competence, trying to teach them rules and memorize vocabulary, and they weren't doing it, they weren't getting it, and yet they could somehow speak like 2 or 3 or 4 languages, some of them. I realized maybe this is a me problem. Maybe there's something with my approach and the way that I'm looking at this. And so when I stumbled into a Russian classroom one day, Michelle Whaley, best human on earth, Russian classroom in Anchorage, Alaska, and I saw her doing something really crazy. I saw her, I didn't know what I saw, really. I just walked into her class and the kids were like standing on chairs and like doing motions, and she was talking in Spanish and they were all in Russian, and they were all laughing and having a great time. And I mean, the whole thing was in Russian. It was a Russian 1 class, so I was super confused. And then afterward, I was like, what did I just see? She said, oh, it's called TPRS. And here's some DVDs, and you can go watch them. So I started learning about it, and that day started me on a journey, realizing that there are more than one ways that you can build linguistic competence. You can build linguistic competence explicitly. You can build a linguistic system, a system for communicating by teaching kids, by giving them the pieces, giving them the items, so saying, here are the words that you need to memorize, and here is the way that you connect those words, here's the syntax, memorize it, and then here's what it looks like in this context, and now memorize what it looks like in this context. But in this context, it works like this, so learn that, and in this other context like this, and you can do that. Or, there's another way. This is what I learned through experience, and then later was able to get words put to it by building a patent. This is where this is going to be a little bit tricky because I can't be right in front of it, so bear with me. So when we talk about building linguistic competence implicitly, which is an option for all of you, it begins with input. It begins with language coming into your head through your eyes, through reading, and through your ears, through listening. And when that happens, all of the little linguistic items, all of the forms contained within that language come into your brain, and your brain automatically, subconsciously, completely involuntarily begins to process them, or try to process them. And so what your brain is trying to do when it's trying to process those linguistic forms is it's trying to link those forms to meaning. It's trying to make sense of the forms that are coming into your head through your eyes and through your ears. If your brain can create a link between form and meaning, so if you can understand one of those forms, then that form is, that link is created, and that form is received and applied to what's called your developing mental representation of language, which is like a web of language in your head. So when we talk about what language is like this system that you're building all the time in your head. So we say language is a system for communication. Where does that system live? It's in your head. There's this web, this mental representation of language. And when you are exposed to input that you understand, that your brain can process, processable input, your brain takes those forms and it places them on this web. And this web, I like to picture it, I mean, you've got like a little bit of a graphic there. You have all these connecting points and then you have lines between it. And I like thinking about it like one of those jungle gyms on a playground, one of those things that you can it's like a half dome and you can climb on top of it, or you can hang down below it and kids can fall off and break their arm. So that's how I like to picture it. And all of those dots are different linguistic items. So you might have the word swam, and you might have the word ocean, and those two words are connected because you can swim in an ocean. And ocean might be connected to deep, because oceans are deep, and deep might be connected to dug, which is connected to dig, and not digged, right? I digged a hole, no, that doesn't work. So there's no connection to ED, to rand, all of these different action words. So your brain is constantly processing this input, and it is adding new pieces to this mental representation of language in your head, and it's forging new connections. This web is what tells you how you can and can't combine words. So when we think about explicit instruction, You have to teach your students what the items are. You have to teach them how to connect them. And you also have to teach them how not to connect them and in what contexts. But what your brain is doing implicitly, as you're exposed to input, is building this on its own. All it needs is input feeding it that it can understand. As long as you understand it, it can be applied to that developing mental representation of language, and then you can draw on that for output. So then when we speak or when we write, the language that spills out into the air or onto a page is a window into what that mental representation of language looks like. So we can see what connections have been made by our students' amazing brains, and we can see what connections are still missing. And the only way to fill in those connections is through more exposure to input that they understand. Now, if we rewind back to that processing moment, so language is coming into your eyes and your ears, your brain's trying to process it. Well, what happens if it can't? What happens if your brain is exposed to linguistic forms, to forms contained within a bit of language that it can't make sense of? Well, it's dumped. That's called dump. It goes in one ear and out the other. Your brain can't do anything with it because it doesn't know where to put it on this web. And there isn't evidence that an explicit language that's learned explicitly applies to this mental representation of language. So there are different linguistic systems that you're building. You can use your explicit language to monitor this system, to correct maybe language that you produce that you've acquired, but you can't notice that your students have a hole and then tell them, oh, this is what it is. You can't make those connections. The only thing that can make those connections is your student's brain as it is exposed to input. Dr. Bill Van Patten, that was his input processing model, he concluded that although comprehension does not guarantee acquisition, acquisition cannot happen if comprehension doesn't occur. And this connects to one of my prior beliefs about language learning, because I used to think that the best way for my students to acquire language, so if I was just going to be giving them an immersion type experience, I should give them as native-like language as I could. I should speak fast, I should speak with great complexity, and they would figure it out because they need to get used to that discomfort. They need to figure out how to make sense of someone speaking quickly and stuff. But language can't be acquired if it's not understood. And just like when I'm talking to my kids, I use simplified language. We need to do that with our students. Yes, they have I was gonna say complex adolescent brains, but I don't really know. I don't know if they're more complex or whatever. They have adolescent brains, but they still are learning a new language, and they still need those same things that they had when they acquired their first language. We acquire language when we understand messages, when we understand what people tell us, and when we understand what we read. That is how language is acquired implicitly. And so, as we think about reimagining language classes, I think, what would it look like to take an implicit approach to language teaching? What would that look like? Well, kids would need input, communicative input, so we'd have to find something to talk about, and then I'd have to make sure that they'd understand it. But what would be the repercussions of that? What would be the consequences? So explicit instruction, you've got to learn things, you have to memorize things, you have to practice things, and I know you guys are all super amazing language teachers and you have tons of really fun activities that your kids really love. But I would venture to bet that you still have some kids that are failing, or you still have some kids that are not coming back to take language again. Maybe kids that, like my son Leland, have developed, and sometimes who knows why, kids develop these beliefs, but have developed this idea that I'm stupid, I can't do this, and when you look at a page of grammars when your teacher's trying to ask you to do something, it's just too hard to expose yourself to that failure again, And so it would be really just way easier if you reject yourself rather than like being rejected by your teacher. So if you just shut down, it's like, I'm gonna like deselect myself from this activity first. And I'm just gonna say like, no, I can't do this. Or I'm just gonna put my head down, like, I'm just too tired for this today, or just not come to the class. But when language is learned implicitly, all kids need to do is listen. Their brain does the work involuntarily, automatically, and just like my son Leland, like he was standing up, he was doing his thing, and this girl just kept making statements, and it broke through. That connection was made, and our students could do that. An implicit approach to instruction gives students equal access to success. When we try to trim down all the extras, like all the schooly things of school, so you have to arrive on time, and you have to be sitting up straight, and you have to be doing your homework, and you have to write your name on the paper. All of these things are things that distract from what we're actually teaching, which is language. And if I think about language is at the heart of human experience. And so as a language teacher, I can focus on helping my students to become good students and productive members of society. And that is going to have repercussions because some kids are going to be able to do that, some kids aren't. And if they don't buy into that, if they don't say like, yes, sign me up for that, I want to be a good student, I want to be a good productive member of society, then they don't get to be a language learner. However, if we use an implicit approach to teaching, all of my kids, and if I try to trim out all of those extra things as best as I can, and I mean, obviously you have requirements from administrators, and there's things that you have to do. So as much as you can, if you trim those out, and you just focus on communicating with your kids such that they understand and let their brains doing the work, every single child in your class has equal access to success as a language learner. Every single child. All students are capable of acquiring languages, and they deserve to believe that about themselves. They deserve to believe that they are capable. The second thing that an implicit approach gives you is content freedom. So if you are focused on providing your students with input, and you know that all they need to do is receive the input, hear it, read it, and understand it, and you don't have to teach about the language, so you're no longer a Chinese teacher or a French teacher, like an in-Chinese teacher, or an in-French or an in-German teacher. You're teaching in French and German. You can teach about anything. And so what you get to do when you have content freedom is you can look for things that are going to be connecting. You can focus on what can I do to help my students connect with each other, connect with me, because y'all are awesome, so of course your students want to connect with you, to connect with their passions, with their purposes, and with the world. So here are some things that you can do, and I wanted to start by talking about this ask a question thing, because this is really what changed everything for my son Leland. So this idea of asking a question, okay? His class, it was doing show and tell. So he had to bring something and he had to say something about himself, show something about himself. And then you ask, okay, what is this? Or what do you like to do? Or what have you made? And having that chance to talk about themselves gave Leland a connection that I don't know that he would have had in a different setting. Kids do show and tell in kindergarten, and they talk to classmates at recess. But then if you think about what happens as kids, really move out of kindergarten and start going through the academic, when do they actually have the chance in school to learn about each other? When do they ever get the chance in school to to realize that they have a connection with a classmate, and to hear from that classmate, wow, you're pretty awesome. Kids are exposed to, they're connected to each other all the time in probably really unhealthy ways. on social media. They might be in groups with kids that are like them, but they don't have the chance in the school day to make connections with kids that they think aren't like them. And math teachers gotta teach math, and science teachers gotta teach science, and band teachers gotta practice the instruments. But language teachers can talk about kids. So you can ask questions about kids' lives, and you can say, oh, where did you go this weekend? What did you do this weekend? And someone can say something, and someone says, oh my gosh, I saw that movie too. I did that too. And you start forming connections, and you give the chance for kids to feel like they belong, that they're accepted, that they aren't getting anywhere else in their lives. And kids don't need complex language to be able to engage in these conversations. It is a skill for you as a teacher to learn. How can I help my students to communicate when they really don't have a complex linguistic system in their head yet? But Alicia put this slide together, and like they can respond with drawings, or they can bring in objects like Leland did. They can respond with proper nouns. They can respond with level appropriate language, or they can respond with gestures like raising your hand, and you as the teacher can narrate that. And as you're having this, facilitating this conversation with your students, they're receiving input. These are some strategies that we'll be going over. I have a workshop this afternoon. Alicia has one today, and I have one tomorrow morning as well. We'll be going over some of these strategies that you can use to help your students to understand you, limiting the number of vocabulary words that you're using, going slow, asking clarifying questions, rephrasing things. You can tell stories to your students. Stories are one of the most powerful tools that we have as humans. When you hear facts and figures, the two areas of your brain are activated: language comprehension and language processing. So you're just like, okay, check, I've got it. I understood what that fact is, computed. But when you hear a story, 7 areas of your brain are activated: movement, language processing, sense, language comprehension, sounds, colors, and shapes. So when you hear a story, you embody that story, you experience it, especially with stories that have, with plots that are character-driven. You become part of, you feel like you're a part of the story. So you can tell your stories, your students' traditional stories, like Rumpelstiltskin. You can tell them current events or historical events. And these are some of the ways that you can connect students to their passions and to their purposes, like telling your students the story of Lonesome George, who was a tortoise in the Galapagos Islands, who has a very tragic tale. Telling stories like that can help students to latch on to what things are meaningful to them in their lives, what their purposes are going to be, what their calling in life is going to be. You can tell personal stories. Okay, that's Leland a couple of years ago. That was, some of you may have seen that story before. That was about the time that I ate a human tooth that was in my salad. It ended up being Leland's, but it took a while to figure that out. So you can tell stories from your life, and you can help your students tell the stories from their lives. This is a way that you can form connections with your students, and that they can form connections with each other. You can tell, this is a traditional story, again, just attending to comprehension. You don't have to tell stories in the way that you read them in your first language. You can simplify the language so that your students can understand them to communicate the message. You can describe something. This is a video, I recently shared a bunch of resources for this. This is a video, amazing video called 5, and it follows the story of 5 kids from around the world that are getting ready to go to their places of worship. So 5 different kids, 5 different places, 5 different religions. And the video shows these really short clips that shows how, as these kids are getting ready to go to their place of worship, they're doing all of these similar things. So all of these connections between them. They're all washing their hands. They're all putting on their shoes. They're all walking there. When they get there, there's always like some kind of a candle or a light. They're all praying. So all of these connections that they have before them, and you can describe these images and use that as a way for your students to see themselves reflected in your class, and also to form connections with other kids. I guess my message, as we're reimagining language classes, I think in a lot of ways the pandemic has given us an opportunity. It's given us a lot of really crappy things, but it's given us an opportunity to sit back and really think about what really matters. And for our family, thinking about school for our kids, like I just want my kids to feel capable. I want my kids to feel like they're as amazing as I know that they are. And we did find a place in this homeschool community that works for all of my kids, not just my other 4. I'm still really mad about that, by the way. But your classrooms can be that place for your kids that through the whole day there is the grind of academics, and there's that like, okay, well you're behind in math, so we've got to be working on your math, or you've got to get your grade up so you can get into college, and there's all this grind. But when they come to your class, they can just be. And I know it sounds like this like foo-foo fantasy thing, but it really is true. When you think about how you acquired language, you weren't working at it. You were just connecting with the people around you. You were listening to the things that they were saying. You were hearing stories read to you. And here you are. You speak that language. And your students can do that too in your classrooms. So your classrooms can be that moment, that safe place in the day where students can be themselves, where they can be friends with kids that they aren't friends with on the outside, but maybe they'll become friends with them, who knows? And where they can have a chance to really think about who they are and what they think about all of the crazy things that are happening in the world, and all the meaningful things and all the funny things and all the sad things, like all the things. So as you guys are going through the rest of the conference today and tomorrow and listening to all of these strategies that you're hearing, all these ideas about things that you do, please, I just encourage you to think about how can you use each one of those things to connect with your students, to help them to feel capable. Is that a strategy that is going to help all of your students to feel capable? Who is it including, who is it excluding? And what can you do to create that connection? So letting our classes be places of joy, being uplifting moments in the day, even when you're really stressed out and not your best self. On some days at least, being uplifting, where students can feel successful, where they can feel connection, and that your class can be enough, that what happens in your class, wherever they get to, whatever progress they make, that's enough. Because they are good enough, they are smart enough, who they are is amazing. So with that, I am done.